This recording will cover Chapter 9 in your textbook, Developing and Teaching the Transition IEP. And I hope you don't think that I'm, saying the other chapters are not important, but just the way that this class is, being split with half IEP kind of and half transition, it's hard to fit everything in. So please make sure you are looking at the PowerPoints for the other chapters. I'm just doing the recordings for the ones that I think will be the most beneficial for you. All right, so this chapter is about developing and teaching the transition IEP. There are your objectives. Is the chapter organizer, the key concept, the big question: how do we ensure that the transition IEP supports both age-appropriate standards and students' post-school goals? So that's something we really want to think about. We want the standards to be age appropriate. They might need some accommodations or modifications to the standards, right? But we want age appropriate standards and also students post-school goals. I think I said schools post-school. You know what I mean? Students post-school goals. Okay. So again, remember there are indicators 13 and 14 that we have talked about: appropriateness of transition plans, post-school outcomes of students with disabilities. And these are really, legal basis. Remember, an IEP is a legal document. So these deal with reporting the data. So post-secondary annual goals, the preferred outcomes for the areas of education, employment, and independent living, what the student wants. And the annual IEP goals represent a desired outcome after 1 year of instruction. We want to think about how we write our IEP goals and objectives, which you all just had some practice with when you did the IEP project, which is partly why I had you do that project. I know some of you selected the student who was kind of transition age, so you got some practice with that. So remember, when you're writing the goals and objectives, you want to think about audience, and I think I call it learner. In the slides that I do, I talk about the learner. Same difference. Behavior, conditions, and degree or criterion. So in your textbook, and I want to show you, I want to focus on this case study as well. In your textbook on page 201, it looks like there's a section: measurable IEP goals and objectives. So A, audience, usually the students, right? B, behavior, measurable, observable demonstration of intended outcomes. So you want to think about, how is the behavior going to be measured and observed, okay? C, conditions. So what is available or not available to the student, time, resources, persons. D, degree of criterion. So that would be amount of work, degree or percentage correct. And some of you wrote your goals like that. So here's an example. Each student, Bob will sort a hamper full of dirty clothes into colored versus whites, identify proper washing machine settings. I add the word washer, add the correct amount of soap, load the clothes, turn on the washer, and unload the washer when the cycle is complete. So behaviors, this lists each one that's observable and important. Using a written list of steps, that's the conditions, so that's available to them, right? And requiring no teacher prompts, which is also a condition, on 4 out of 5 trials in the home ec classroom, which is another condition. See, this to me is really long and wordy, but that's what your textbook supports. So this is kind of like you're doing a task analysis. You're looking at the skill of, kind of doing laundry and breaking it down into steps as to what the student needs to do. So just take a look in the textbook there, for the examples of the goals, and we'll get back to Jamal in just 1 second. All right. So here we go. So the transition IEP. So the case study. So I do want you to take a few minutes. If you have the textbook, look at Jamal. And I'm actually starting to think about how I could incorporate Jamal as maybe an assignment for next year, next time I teach this class, removing some of the assignments that you've done, and then putting in maybe Jamal or a different case study. A little aside, I know that there's been a lot of work this semester. So if you notice, I have been pretty lenient grading some of the most of the things, because as we get started, I'm like, I gave them a lot to do. So being that it's a new class, it's always a balance trying to figure out, well, how much do I give them of the IEP? How much do I give them of transition? It's all so important. But I know that you've probably been a little overwhelmed. This is not the first time you will see IEPs, I promise. So hopefully, though, as you move forward into your courses, or if you're out in the schools, hopefully you'll have a starting point, a background, some background knowledge, if you will, of the IEP process and what it takes to create an IEP, which remember is a legal document. Okay, so the transition IEP, and again we'll come back, I'll show you just a second. So we want to think about instructional planning for transition teaching. And I know not all of you think you're going to end up in a situation where you are working with students who are of transition age, but who knows, right? If your degree is K-12 and they say, hey, we need you in an 8th grade classroom, and that's the only job in this district, are you going to say no? Probably not, right? So that's why I know some of you are like, no, I'm early childhood. I only want to teach 4-year-olds, which I get. I hear you, but this is just trying to prepare you for whatever. So instructional planning for transition teaching, you want to think about physical location and structure, emotional and behavioral structure. And, you know, your textbook and the slides will tell you more information about this. Oh, sorry. Whole group, large group instruction, small group instruction. So really, this is kind of what you're doing, right, in any classroom, thinking about the physical location, the environment, how you're setting it up. How are you going to ensure the students feel safe and welcome? How are you going to teach whole class, large group, small group, or peers, you know, peer tutoring, individualized instruction, right? So all of these things are what you need to think about when you're talking about instructional planning for, and really it could just say teaching, right? Transition is kind of in parentheses here, in my opinion. Okay, some other opportunities, print materials and resources. What are you going to use for a student who's in 10th grade but reading on a 2nd grade level, right? So going back to our buddy Thomas, think about what materials you could use for Thomas. Okay, then opportunities across instructional materials. Again, some more, you know, manipulatives and models. What kind of physical or, you know, manipulatives do you have that the students can work with? Okay, what kind of technology resources do you have? And what about human resources? You know, community resources, stuff like that. Maybe, you know, going out into the community. Some other things to think about, teacher-directed instruction. You know, there's different approaches. You want to make sure that you're demonstrating, you're modeling, explaining. If you are taking Education 763 with me coming up, we'll talk a lot about explicit direct instruction and how you can, you know, model, watch me, I do, we do, you do, right? And then using mnemonics, thinking about stuff like that, task analysis. That's what I was just talking about, right? Looking at those larger and more complex skills. Okay, we also want to think about how are you going to monitor and evaluate those students? How are you going to, you know, are you going to provide progress monitoring, or are you going to conduct progress monitoring, I should say? You want to select a sequence and instructional examples to fit students' interests and needs. You also want to think about, I'm not sure if my page is, okay, it's not, content and approaches, right? So cooperative learning, how can you use that in your classroom? How can you include all students? Okay, some other teacher-guided or non-direct instruction, content and approaches. Direct and non-direct instruction can occur together. You want to think about presenting new strategies. Hey, today we're going to learn a new strategy. Watch me. You want to provide feedback and provide independent practice. I know I'm going fairly quickly, but it's because I want to get back to the case study. Some more monitoring and evaluation, you know, think about open-ended questions, potential for numerous right answers, and then allow them to explain, especially in math, for example, how they got to that answer, right? Oh, you solved it this way. You solved it this way. Okay, both of you tell me how you got the same answer. You want to make sure you're observing, monitoring, as we've talked about. So you want to also think about student-guided or project-based learning. So see, I really like this chapter because there's so much that you can, again, kind of take the word transition out of it. And there's so much that you can apply to just kind of everyday teaching. So you want to think about, you know, using these project-based learning. So the important steps move students from inquiry and discovery learning activities that are under the guidance of teachers to completely self-directed learning. And of course, in special ed, they will still need some guidance and some direction, but we want our students, especially at the transition age, to be as independent thinkers as they can, right? So of course, monitoring and evaluation, teachers can provide support, intervene if they needed, maybe a checkpoint, you know, if they're doing a project, say, okay, at the end of this week, we're going to check in. I want to see where you are with these 2 steps. At the end of next week, I want to check in and see where you are with these 3 steps, right? So stuff like that. Okay, then I think I'm skipping. Oh, sorry, my mouse is having a little bit of issues, people. Okay, I did that one. Okay, and then student-directed learning, content and approaches. a lot of adult learning is self-directed. So if our students are thinking about leaving, getting ready to leave high school, okay, well, they're going to need to start to take some responsibility and some initiative and some ownership. So we have to teach them to take on that responsibility of educating themselves and advocating for themselves also, right? They need to advocate. They need to be self-determined. They need to know their strengths and needs, recognize the needed resource, and ask for help when needed. So all of these things are things that you might have to teach them if you are teaching this age group of students. And then, of course, we want to learn. Our self-directed learning is a culminating of teaching and entails a student all of these things. All right, so that's the chapter, but stick with me because I want to go back to the case study really quickly. Okay, so I'm going to try to move it for us. So, of course, it's going to work. Y'all just whatever. We're just going to do it this way. So on page 200 and, oh gosh, I can't even see the page number now. I lost it. On the page. Oh my gosh. Why, y'all? Why? Okay, hold on. Got to pause for 1 second. I jumped ahead. Okay, sorry, y'all. I got ahead of myself. All right, so on page 202 is where the case study starts. So it's about Jamal. He's a 16-year-old male who is currently enrolled in the 9th grade and expecting to graduate in 4 to 5 years. Right, he has a moderate intellectual disability with mild cerebral palsy in both legs. He has had severe seizures. He had successful surgery that stopped the seizures. Placed in Gen Ed math in 7th and 8th grades with the modified curriculum. He was successful. Okay, the 9th grade math teacher knew him from the YMCA, wanted to include him in the Gen Ed math class. Teacher also did some training with the social studies teacher. So he was in Gen Ed for math, science, and social studies this past year, which is great, right? He's extremely interested in automobiles. His father and grandfather were mechanics. He is unsure of the various options and interests within the industry. All right, so that's kind of where we start. And then there is, some stuff here that goes along with him. But take a few minutes, look at Jamal. So here's his vision statement. He directs the team to future planning statements, describes how he would like to work in the automotive industry, live in an apartment, visit with relatives, and socialize with friends in his spare time. So that's what he wants, right? That's our kind of end goal. So thinking back to, a few chapters ago, I think either 5 or 6, we talked about backward planning. So we want him, okay, he knows where he wants to be. So how are we going to get him there? And remember, we talked about, I think it was chapter 6, where even as early as 4th, 5th grade, we want to start thinking about, he might not know exactly at that time what he wants to do, but we need to think about how we can get him to work in cooperative groups, take feedback, be more independent, stuff like that. Okay. So again, here's his vision statement. So now we're going to kind of work backwards from that and think about how are we going to get him there. Okay. So again, here's his vision statement. He would like to take driving vacations, attend holidays with family. So he wants to be pretty independent, right? He wants to do, wait for it, what other kids his age are doing. And that's really the point of, not the point, but, one of the main driving forces behind transition. How can we get these students with disabilities to be as quote unquote typical as their peers, socializing with friends, working at a mechanic, being a mechanic, whatever, taking vacations, spending time with friends and family. All of those things are probably, things that you all do, right? So how can we help our students to get there? So there's a vision level of, the vision statement, present level of performance. Okay, so it talks about that. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go through all that. But take a few minutes, look through this case study. Again, starts on page 202. Here's the age appropriate transition assessment. We have talked about that before. Here are his measurable post-school goals. Upon graduation, he will be competitively employed in the automobile industry. Okay, he will receive technical and on-the-job training to work competitively in the automobile industry. So that's his education and training goal. And then his independent living goal, he will live in an apartment with a roommate or spouse. Right? Very quote unquote typical goals that a lot of other people his age want. All right. So look through this. Again, it talks about his courses of study, how kind of we, the team, how are we going to get him there? Here's some stuff we're going to do for him, some services, OT, PT, daily living, stuff like that. All right, measurable goals and objective. So really take a few minutes. Goals, objective for reading, writing, my mouse. It's not even a mouse, y'all. It's a touchpad and still, mathematics. I know I'm going fast because I have like 22 seconds left. Indicator 13 checklist. Okay, how are we going to, here's the IDEA requirement. Where's the evidence of that in his IEP? instructional planning. And so how are we going to get them there? Physical structure and location. All right. So take a few minutes, look through the case study. And I think that you don't have to do anything with it, but just look through it. And that's the end of chapter 9.